Chapter 43. All Hell Breaks Loose. The press corps, limited to 30 reporters from the world's most prestigious newspapers and magazines, and handpicked by Carla, had a block of seats in the center of the auditorium. No television coverage was allowed. Ari found his assigned place and sat down. Behind him, the delegates were pouring in. Ari found it strangely ominous to see these sophisticated political leaders jostling their way, seemingly as eager and excited as children at a Saturday movie matinee. Ari had earlier heard the rumors circulating among the guests that the President of the United States had been deluged with requests from ambassadors, members of Parliament, senators, and congressmen from around the world who were eager to attend. Thousands had apparently been turned away for lack of space, and now the small 300-seat auditorium was filling rapidly with those fortunate enough to have been invited. Simultaneous translators were in their booths at the rear, and those delegates who were not proficient enough in English were putting on earphones and dialing their particular native language. A hush fell over the auditorium as the 4 celebrities came out from backstage and sat down in a row of chairs facing the audience just behind the rostrum. Leighton was on the right, with Del Sasso to his right. Next to him was Carla, then Korev, the latter looking more grim than ever. Ari wondered how Carla had gotten involved with Del Sasso and what her fate would be. He was becoming more apprehensive with each passing moment. "Psychic powers? I'm not easily convinced," muttered the man on Ari's left. His badge identified him as an editor of Time magazine. "A lot of hype. I hope this isn't a waste of time. What do you think?" "Oh, I don't have any doubt that Del Sasso is going to dazzle us," responded Ari. "The question is, who gave him these powers, and why?" "Who?" interjected the man on Ari's right, who had been listening in with great interest. "What do you mean by who?" "You've read the material. Entities from a non-physical dimension are supposed to be involved," returned Ari. "Who are they, and what are they up to? That's my question." "Benevolent, highly evolved beings, rescuing us from our own destructive tendencies, so it was said. I hope it's true." "That's what I'm skeptical about," explained Ari. "Not about whether the powers exist. I'm sure they do. But are these entities as altruistic as they claim? That's my concern." Further conversation was cut off by the sound of Leighton's grainy voice coming over the loudspeaker. "Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished representatives of the world's nations, select members of the press, it is a great honor and joy to welcome each of you here today. We are gathered just to the south of San Francisco, where in 1945, hopeful delegates from less than half of the nations we represent met to lay the foundation for the United Nations. Today, we lay the foundation for something far more significant, a new world order that will make all men and all nations truly united and equal. When we Earthlings have proven our peaceful intentions, we'll qualify to apply for entrance into an intergalactic community of civilizations that have evolved far beyond us and that stand ready to share their technology and supernatural powers. We will then have undreamed-of access to the vast universe of space and its limitless resources. We must crawl before we can walk, take baby steps before we can run, and then fly." To his consternation, Ari realized that Del Sasso was staring at him as though he were reading his mind again. His expression had turned from warmth to malevolence. Quickly averting his eyes, Ari found himself fighting a sudden dizziness. "You're a lying traitor. You won't get out of here alive." The accusation came full-blown into his thoughts, as though Del Sasso had telepathically implanted it there. Ari struggled to regain control of his mental processes. He seemed to be sinking into an abyss, drawn there inexorably by some terrifying force. With great difficulty he recovered his emotional equilibrium, but in the meantime he had missed almost all of Leighton's speech. He heard only the last few sentences. "Receiving the power entails submission to the direction of the Nine, until they determine that we are well established in the new order and capable of carrying on by ourselves. Until there are comparable psychic leaders in each country to form a competent world council, the Nine's orders will be relayed through Antonio Del Sasso. He is the man whom I now wish to present to you once again First of all, on the giant television screen just behind me, and then in person, as he gives further live demonstrations of these revolutionary capabilities. The applause was thunderous. Ari pretended to join in briefly, but his heart was not in it. That momentary look of unremitting hatred in Del Sasso's eyes had settled the issue. This was a clever trap. If Del Sasso wasn't the devil himself, then he was his right-hand man. Ari wanted to stand up and shout a warning, but he knew it would go unheeded. Looking around the audience, it was apparent that everyone else was eagerly following like sheep to the slaughter. Even the skeptic from Time was applauding enthusiastically. Should he get up and leave? If they let him go, which was doubtful, he would miss what he came to see. No, he had an obligation both to the Mossad and the Post, and to all mankind, to witness what occurred and to bring a warning to the world. Del Sasso had sworn that he would not live to tell the tale. Perhaps his chance to escape, if it was possible at all, would be better if he stayed until the end and then got lost in the crowd, rather than trying to leave now. The lights were dimmed and the giant television screen came alive with what seemed to be the most remarkable display of the supernatural that anyone could imagine. Del Sasso was first of all seen holding a thin wire, which he moved slowly over a map. The wire suddenly twisted downward, and an assistant hurried over to record the precise latitude and longitude to which the wire was pointing. Several geologists came on to testify that Del Sasso had in this manner pinpointed numerous oil pools around the world in the most unlikely places, pools of high-grade oil that were even larger than those under the Arabian desert. This vast wealth was specifically being located in areas of great poverty. Its development would obviously transform those countries, raising their standard of living to that of the Western world, thus contributing to worldwide prosperity. The next sequence showed Del Sasso imparting some mysterious force through his hands to ordinary plants growing in a pyramid-shaped hothouse. What these plants produced was then displayed. Tomatoes the size of volleyballs, cabbage the size of basketballs, apricots the size of baseballs. The video was stopped while an assistant secretary of agriculture joined Leighton on the platform and displayed some of the actual produce. He explained that field tests had demonstrated that seeds from the plants that Del Sasso had infused with psychic power would flourish in the most depleted soil and under the most arid conditions, and that the resulting fruit and vegetables contained double the normal amounts of vitamins and minerals. Apparently, Del Sasso had activated some unknown process similar to photosynthesis that allowed the plants to gather much of their sustenance from the atmosphere and the sun's rays. The video then resumed with shots of Dr. Korov, before his defection, in his secret lab near Moscow, followed by an astonishing series of brief scenes in rapid succession around the world. Soviet leaders plotting the August 1991 failed coup in a secret meeting inside the Kremlin. Generals and their aides conferring at an emergency meeting of NATO to discuss the coup. The president's cabinet meeting in a closed session in the White House. Drug czars meeting in secret in Colombia. A top-level mafia conclave in Sicily. The Pope in private prayer in his chambers. And officers conferring over a map on the bridge of a Soviet nuclear submarine under the polar ice cap. Subtitles in English explained each scene. The lights went on, and Leighton stepped quickly to the microphone, amid a buzz of whispered comment erupting throughout the stunned audience. "You were right," the skeptic to Ari's left confided under his breath. "This is incredible. No doubt about it." Ari nodded soberly. "But why Del Sasso? What makes him so special?" "Well, he's going to share it, teach everyone," came the quick reply. The man had obviously taken the bait. "You're wondering how we made all of those videos of secret meetings around the world," said Leighton with a self-assured smile. "You'd never guess. They were all shot by Antonio Del Sasso from a laboratory just down the hall to your left, and without a camera of any kind. Actually, they were recorded from his brain, directly onto videotape, just as you saw them." He paused to enjoy the stunned audience's reaction, continuing when quiet had once again been restored. "You saw Dr. Korov, for example," Leighton went on, "in his laboratory north of Moscow with some of his assistants working on a secret experiment. That was before he came to this country, and he was unaware that the video was being taken at the time. And remember, that was in a top-secret and heavily guarded commando base, whose very existence was known to only a handful of Kremlin elite. It was Dr. Del Sasso, in fact, who located that clandestine laboratory for the CIA with his mind. I need not tell you the potential of such capabilities, not only for ending war but crime as well. That is why we selected the shots of the secret meetings of drug czars in Colombia and of mafia leaders in Sicily. Those men have not been arrested yet, but you may be certain they will be once the plan has gone into effect. Ladies and gentlemen of the world community, both crime and war will become as obsolete on this planet as poverty and religious superstition. A standing ovation interrupted the speaker. When the applause had simmered down, Leighton introduced, with obsequious superlatives that bordered on worship, the star of the show once again. Del Sasso wasted no time getting into action. We have among us today, in the very center of the auditorium, 30 representatives of the world's most prestigious newspapers and magazines. Some of these reporters and editors may still be skeptical. After all, they're our watchdogs and need to be careful in what they report. Let me present them to you. To the utter astonishment of the audience, and to the chagrin and terrified cries of the press, all 30 were suddenly lifted out of their seats and levitated upward until their heads touched the high vaulted ceiling. Any faint hope of escape that Ari may still have retained was now gone. Del Sasso had no doubt chosen this group because Ari was among them. The monster was toying with him. Obviously, when the time came, the hatred this incredible man had projected would express itself violently, though surely he would not wreak his vengeance publicly. After remaining levitated for a full minute, Ari and the others were gently lowered into their seats once again. The applause was deafening. There were no skeptics now. Del Sasso needed to do no more. Nevertheless, he proceeded with a rapid series of demonstrations beyond anything Elor had shown to Ari. There were materializations and dematerializations, but of the most sensational kind. Bullets fired at him from a machine gun at point-blank range left him untouched. A Marine colonel was called out of the audience and given a flamethrower. Strapping it on his back, he turned it on and aimed it at Del Sasso from about 20 feet away. The flame shot out, heading directly at the huge figure, but when it got within a few feet of his chest, it disappeared. Del Sasso then began walking toward the colonel. The flames receded as he advanced until suddenly, when he was standing directly in front of it, the flamethrower itself vanished. Spontaneously, the audience, which had been sitting in breathless wonder during this incredible display, came to its feet, cheering wildly. Del Sasso smiled imperceptibly, bowed several times, then returned to his seat on the platform next to Carla. She was beaming proudly, trying to catch Ari's eye, looking for his approval, but he pretended not to notice her. Leighton was back at the microphone. It now gives me great pleasure to present to you our keynote speaker of the evening, a man whose presence is a symbol not only of scientific greatness, but of the solidarity between the United States of America and the new confederacy of former Soviet republics, Dr. Viktor Korev. Slowly and deliberately, the Russian scientist stepped to the rostrum, took his notes out of a plain folder, and spread them before him. Representatives of the world's nations and honored guests, he began, looking out over the audience. Since coming here to this remarkable research center, I've been doing what all of you must carefully and courageously do tonight. That is, I have been attempting to understand the ever more incredible happenings in these laboratories and their implications for all humanity. What you have seen on videotape is all true, and what you've just witnessed live on this stage is only a small sample of this man's capabilities. His feats are light years ahead of anything we were able to accomplish or even dreamed of accomplishing during my years of psychic research in any other country. There is no way, as both Dr. Leighton and Dr. Del Sasso have already carefully explained, that such power could be developed apart from these entities known as the Archons, or the Nine. I can tell you without fear of contradiction, based upon my many years of research, that no human agency has developed nor can develop such powers. They come exclusively from the Nine, who themselves inhabit a non-physical dimension of existence, but are capable of entering the physical universe as well. These highly evolved entities control this power and dispense it as they will and to whom they will, and they have now declared their willingness, through Antonio del Sasso, to make this power available to the world in order to prevent the destruction of this planet. For the world to receive this power, as we have already been told, and you have formal agreements to take back to your governments to be signed when approved, we must of necessity submit ourselves completely to these entities. This must be done through their ambassador, Antonio del Sasso, of course. I think you are all convinced of the important part he will play in the plan, and of his unique qualifications to do so. Naturally, if we are to submit totally to the Nine, then we must trust them completely. Therein lies the crux of the problem that I have wrestled with over these past few weeks. I want to take you through the process of doubt that I myself have experienced, and then bring you to the happy conclusion I have reached. Here is the reasoning process I myself struggled through. First of all, I was raised in an atheistic country and am an atheist myself. Yet I recognize, as every reasonable person must, that only God, if such a being existed, could be trusted totally. This is true because God, by very definition, is loving and kind and above corruption, even by his own desires, self-existent and infinite, and thus needing nothing from anyone or anything, being himself the creator of all. And because God is, again by very definition, unchangeable, we can, on the basis of both his character and his past performance, have complete confidence in what he will do in the future. Unfortunately, God doesn't exist, so we are left to our own devices and dare not put ourselves at the mercy of anyone else. And as I thought it over carefully, that seemed logically to include the Nine as well. Being less than God, indeed, they deny the very existence of a supreme deity and claim that each of us is a god in his own right, the Nine could conceivably be corrupted by their own selfish desires. Moreover, they could change. Even if they had been completely benevolent in their dealings with mankind for the past 1,000 years, we could not have absolute confidence on the basis of that impressive record that they would not turn against or deceive us in the future. That fact left me with a dilemma. Here Dr. Korev turned and gestured toward Leighton and Del Sasso, who both wore expressions of concern, but seemed generally pleased with his approach thus far. Dr. Leighton and Dr. Del Sasso have known of my doubts and have given of themselves most graciously in helping me to work my way through them. It was not easy, because the problem was a most difficult one. The Nine assure us they desire only our good, but how can we be certain? One persuasive argument is the fact that the Nine are so far beyond man that they really don't need us. There is nothing we can offer them, it would seem, and therefore nothing they would want from us, and so they would have no motive to do us harm in any way. After all, what would be their purpose? For some time I accepted this line of reasoning. I eventually had to face the fact, however, that if they had no interest in harming us, then why would they be interested in helping us? Why would they be interested in us at all? That question left me puzzled, until I realized there was something I had overlooked. Dr. Korev paused to draw several quick breaths at this point. A death-like stillness had settled over the audience. Every eye was fixed in unblinking anticipation upon the speaker. Leighton seemed frozen to his chair, and Del Sasso was ominously motionless, as though he were going into a trance. The Mossad had indicated that such a state enhanced his powers. Ari's sense of dread was growing. He felt as though a spiritual power were fighting against him, trying to take over his mind. Only with great difficulty and determination was he able to weigh the choices and consequences he now realized that he faced in this awesome moment. What this Russian atheist had said about God had hit Ari with stunning force. Here was a man who denied God's existence, something Ari had never totally done. Yet he was explaining things about God that Ari had never thought of, especially why he alone could be trusted. His reasoning had been powerfully persuasive. It had loosed a flood of deep and growing convictions that had been forced upon him by his discussions with Yaakov and Miriam, yet which he had suppressed because acquiescence meant submission to God. Time seemed to stand still. The auditorium receded into unreality, and Dr. Koreb's voice became a distant drone as conversations he'd had with those two followers of Jesus, the only ones he'd known besides Nicole, came back with new force. He could not honestly deny the truth of their arguments, nor could the words of the Hebrew prophets they had presented to him be disputed. He had known this deep inside for some time, but it had taken the arguments of this atheist to force him to acknowledge it. Dr. Koreb's voice, now betraying the strain of a growing fear, yet ringing with a courage born of conviction and the urgent desire to warn the world, caught Ari's full attention again. There was no need to speculate. The evidence was staring me in the face, but I had been unwilling to accept it. It is a matter of record, if Frank Layton will be willing to admit it, and if not, there are others who may have the courage to do so. Here he glanced quickly at Carla, who seemed to be listening sympathetically, that the 9 have been less than forthright in their dealings with those involved in this project, even from the very beginning. They have promised peace, love, and brotherhood. Instead, they have produced violence, involving even the death or insanity of those who have believed their promises and submitted to their control. They promised to create millions of psychics in addition to Del Sasso, but have not produced even one, in spite of diligent efforts in these laboratories to train others on the Cytron, the same machine on which Del Sasso developed his powers. I now doubt that they even intended to empower anyone except him. We have obediently given the 9 complete control of this project, and of our lives as well, and the results so far, other than the powers Del Sasso displays to seduce us, have not been good. It was all coming together for Ari. This Russian was laying out the evil in the Archons, which he had sensed in every contact with Aelor, but had been unwilling to admit. Now it seemed crystal clear. What if the 9 are demons? Yakov made an airtight case to that effect by commanding Aelor to leave in the name of Jesus Christ. They're evil, no doubt about it, bent upon deception, domination, and perhaps even destruction. Ari felt an overpowering urge to get up and run for the nearest exit, but it would obviously do no good. Del Sasso could destroy him instantly. And what about this courageous man? Ari must hear all that he had to say and see what happened to him. What would Del Sasso do? Why had he not stopped him already? From the audience came a restless stirring, a rising murmur. Suddenly, Ari palpably sensed a horrifying, primordial, reptilian presence all around him. It was like nothing he had ever imagined. Layton started to rise from his chair, then sank back, seemingly too stunned to react. An ominous silence, except for the eerie sound of breathing, had settled in the auditorium, like the calm before a storm. The audience was transfixed in paralyzed alarm. Dr. Koreb's words came in a torrent now, as though he were rushing to get it all out. It's the complete control they demand that concerns me. I've experienced the terror of totalitarianism. Yes, there are many changes being made in my native country of Russia, a country that I dearly love. However, that land is far from realizing the freedom that all men cherish, a freedom that I sought in the West, but that I find is lacking even here. Ari could not believe his ears, and it seemed even more unbelievable that neither Layton nor Del Sasso had made a move to stop Korov. Were they afraid of creating an even worse scene in front of this audience, and would therefore simply allow him to finish and then discredit him? And what of the 9? Why had they not silenced him? Was it possible, as Yakov had declared, that neither they nor Del Sasso was as omniscient as they claimed to be? Otherwise, they would have known beforehand Korov's intentions, and he would not be in this position now. This is a crucial gathering. Those of you here today hold the future of the world in your hands. Everything depends upon whether you bow to the will of the 9 or resist them. I warn you now, to submit to their control will be to turn this world into one vast prison, not of bodies confined within cells, but of minds no longer able to think for themselves. The paradise the 9 offer will in fact be the indescribable hell of a totalitarianism more vicious than anything this world has yet seen. Korov's voice had risen to a crescendo of desperation. At last, Layton seemed to shake himself out of his paralysis. Jumping to his feet, he ran to the rostrum and tried to pull the microphone away from Korov. With a last effort, the Russian shouted into the mic, "Close your minds to the Nine's influence. Fight back. Don't let them impose their will." A security guard rushed up and grabbed Korov, tore the mic from his hands, and threw him onto the platform. The unleashing of the Nine's fury came at that moment, and with a violence that swept all rational thought before it. The stillness was broken by a cry of rage from the throat of Del Sasso, seated in meditative yoga position, who appeared now to be in a deep trance. Seats were ripped up from the floor and flew through the air, hurling their occupants like so much flotsam on a stormy sea. The entire auditorium was in a state of massive upheaval. Huge chunks of the roof caved in, crushing scores of delegates to death. And, most horrible of all, the laminated wood beams that supported the ceiling splintered off into long spears. They flew through the air like guided missiles and impaled those who were madly scrambling over bodies and debris in an attempt to reach the exits. Those few who had been seated close enough and managed to reach the exits without being struck down found the doors locked and their escape from the Holocaust denied. Pounding helplessly with their fists on the doors and walls, screaming for help, some died of hysteria while the remainder were crushed under the rain of debris from the collapsing roof that seemed to be aimed at those below by some all-seeing intelligence that was directing the destruction. Clearly, it was the intent of the Nine that there be no survivors to tell the horrible truth. A special fate seemed to be reserved for the press corps. Whether due to their training to observe events closely and report them, or to some unseen hand that held them, they had all remained seated in frozen fascination, staring around them as though compelled to be witnesses to the unmitigated horror. Ari had tried desperately to get out of his seat, but had been unable to move. It was as though some unknown force was holding him down. Ari could hear Dr. Layton's rasping voice in the last spasm of a blasted dream, cursing the Nine. Suddenly he burst into flame, and his scream was quickly swallowed up in the intense heat, as his body seemed almost simultaneously to melt and to turn to ashes. A uniformed man on the platform, apparently the head of security, whom Ari had seen earlier giving orders to some of the guards, was hit in the middle of the back by a heavy piece of the ceiling that knocked him to the floor. He struggled up on one elbow, pulled his revolver from its holster, and in a rage fired several slugs into Layton's disintegrating body. Then he turned it upon Del Sasso, who was sitting entranced in his chair in yoga position, but the gun was torn from his hand and a heavy beam came crashing down and crushed his skull. Still unable to rise from his seat, Ari had searched in vain through the terrifying chaos for Carla. Then he saw her reappear from behind a stage curtain, running back onto the platform toward Korov's motionless form. He was pinned under a section of overhead lighting that had fallen upon him. She and Korov needed help. There must be a backstage exit. Could that be a way of escape? That thought seemed to break the spell that had bound him. With great effort, Ari struggled to his feet. At that instant, a large portion of the floor opened beneath him. He felt himself, along with the rest of the press section, falling into total darkness. He could see nothing at all, not even his own body. Suddenly, he hit what seemed to be a steep, sandy slope. Still in total darkness, Ari felt himself sliding rapidly down the incline, wondering if it would ever end. He could hear the terrified screams of those falling beyond him, fading into empty distance without echo, as though there were no bottom to the pit into which they were plunging. At last he crashed savagely against some hard obstruction and lost consciousness.